to the J and K show. I'm your boy K. Listen, there's so much talk in and around NIL, transfer portals, rev share, too much for any of us to follow. So what we did was bringing a subject matter expert to help us unpack all of what this means and what it means to us, the casual fan. Folks, we are delighted today to have Janine Bowen, legal expert in this area of sports management. And Janine, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to chatting with you today.
Yeah, good stuff. So forget the small talk, right? Let's jump into this. Um, Recently, there was a roundtable held at the White House
Yep.
with President Trump, and this was a topic. I had no idea that this. I know this topic of NIL was important to all of us, but I didn't realize it rose to the level of getting up to the White House. So that's when we really collectively, our editorial team said, hey, we really need to kind of get Janine in here and
Mhm.
someone to help kind of talk through this.
Yep.
So as a topic, and I'm framing this in very layman's terms, they talked about what they can do as an administration to put some sort of structure around NIL. Now, the takeaway for me, and which kind of put me back a little bit, is we had folks of some of the smartest minds in the world sitting inside of
Mhm.
this room. And from my perspective, often what they talked about was wrong. They had
Yeah.
the wrong definitions. They had the wrong, it wasn't consistent with any rulings. It was just kind of more driven based off of what opinions are. One, did you see the interview, round table, and what were your takeaways from that?
Yeah. So I did watch some excerpts. I didn't watch the whole 2 hours, but I watched plenty of it. And it is important to understand that we don't all have a common definition of all these various subjects. So there is a legal definition of rev share. There's a legal definition of NIL. There's a legal definition of pay for play. But unless folks get under the covers and really understand it, then people are confusing the concepts. And so lots of the conversation that you heard in that room for people who were not subject matter experts did not reflect a depth of knowledge. It reflected their colloquial understanding. Okay. And those points weren't correct. Okay. It also reflected a view that the president had of wanting to go back the way things were. And that's simply gone, right? There is no scenario where we can picture scholarship only athletes as the norm across collegiate play, especially for the revenue generating sports. So I think the construct was wrong. I also think the fact that there were no student athletes in the room was wrong. Okay.
Mm.
So, was that a problem about student athletes, or was that a problem about the ecosystem of college sports that they were trying to solve? Okay. Because you can't talk about college sports and not talk about the athletes that are essentially the bread and butter of college sports.
Right.
Conceptually, I
Yeah.
think they were just off track a little bit.
Right. So you brought up the three, I'll describe pillars, if you will. You've
Yes,
got NIL, you've got rev share, you've got pay for play. Can you take a moment for the audience and kind of give a quick summary on what each one of them are?
absolutely. So NIL, name, image, and likeness. From a legal perspective, that comes from a set of intellectual property rights called rights of publicity. Folks will understand the couple of examples I'm about to give you. Rights of publicity. When Michael Jackson passed, his estate granted license rights to his rights of publicity to many people, I think to the tune of $500 million. And those organizations went out and did shows on Broadway, Cirque du Soleil. There's plenty of activity around Michael Jackson's brand post his death. Same thing happened with Elvis Presley and his estate, where his estate essentially allowed entities to come in exchange for dollars, those entities were allowed to commercialize Elvis's name, his image, and his likeness, right? So those two examples, you can hear those in spaces like, yeah, I do know all those things that happened with Elvis, or I do know those things that happened with Michael Jackson. So name, my personal name, okay, image, my likeness, my physical being, okay, and my image, how I'm reflected in space in tangible media are name, image, and likeness. And so I have the ability to control how that is commercialized in the public. My brand should be controlled by me, and any revenue that's generated should be controlled by me. That's NIL. Okay, name, image,
Right.
likeness. Rev share is a completely different concept. Rev share has come out of the House settlement, okay, where the courts indicated that universities were now able to pay athletes up to, in year one, $20.5 million
Right.
out of the revenue of the university. Okay, so before the House settlement, there was already NIL where I could go to my local auto shop, or I could have a big brand like Adidas or others say, I want to pay you, Janine, okay, to put your name, your image, your likeness around my products. Put you on a billboard with my brand. Okay. That existed before the rev share. The rev share is a different layer where it has nothing at all to do with commercializing my brand. It is the university cutting me a check. Now, to make that clear though, they are cutting me a check to use my name, image, and likeness. Okay, but it's a direct payment from the university. So when we hear about these agreements with athletes, there's the university agreement, and then there may be third-party NIL deals.
The collectives.
Collectives,
Right.
right, collectives, major brands, etc. Okay, a Nike deal, my auto deal, whatever. Okay. Now, you also have pay to play. Pay to play means that the university is paying the athlete to play the sport, and pay to play is not permitted.
Right.
So the universities under the rev share are not paying for athletic performance. They are paying for the license to use the name, image, and likeness of an individual. And that individual athlete has to do something in exchange for it. Instagram posts, autograph footballs, show up at these events. Okay. Put your name on a t-shirt, those kinds of things.
Right. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
And putting that in very kind of plain speak so folks can understand exactly what that is.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I think of the NIL,
Yep.
this is what it is. So my school, where I'm an alum from, they have a collective, and this is this third party, and it works closely with the school,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not the school. And the schools make it very clear, we don't know, they know, but they legally say they don't know what happens with that. We as boosters or supporters or corporate sponsors pay into this collective, and then they manage those funds to
Yep.
then go towards a player. And they say that that is for that player, as you mentioned, to be in this commercial or to promote this product on their social media. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's talk about the valuations of these players and so
Yep.
on, which is for a different podcast. I'm not sure how we
Yep.
arrived there. But that's solely what that is. Um, uh, and I think of the genesis of that, if you will. And so for me, that starts with, this is former UCLA forward, Ed O'Bannon. And as urban legend goes, and I don't know if this is exactly the story, but playing video game with his friends.
Yep.
And I remember the video game. It was a March Madness type game. And it had the actual teams, the actual format, conferences, geographical locations. It had
Yep.
everything in there. The rosters did not have names, but what they had was Janine's height, Janine's weight, Janine's city of birth. It
Yep.
just didn't have that name. His friends didn't say, wow, this is cool. How much did you get for this? To which
Mm-hmm.
Ed said, nothing,
That's
which
right.
then essentially started the process, and I'm paraphrasing, obviously. I guess the suit was filed in '08, gets ruled in 14 maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I thought it was interesting because it I don't have your legal mind, but my takeaway was the courts agreed that the NCAA was in violation of antitrust laws, but then went so far as to say they didn't rule or any compensation or anything for it, really, of note. They
That's right.
agreed, you're,
That's right.
there's a violation there, but they
That's
stayed
right.
out of what that compensation looks like. Fast forward now, players, as we all know, kind of get paid and so on. Why is this? And I don't know if this is such a legal question, but why do we get the sense of so many schools and people feeling like they need to interject themselves on managing this NIL money, these funds where the courts have already determined you have nothing to do with this? Why is that?
Let me make sure I understand your question. So, with respect to the way that the collectives are operating, is that your question?
Yeah, well, so when we talk, and so this is also, I guess, when we often hear administrators, coaches, they talk about managing the NIL,
Yeah.
salary caps, you'll hear
Yes. Okay.
thrown out, and other things around that. And I always yell at the TV screen or the computer screen, it's not your money. You're not generating it. You have nothing to do with it. I gave money to that
Mm-hmm.
collective. I didn't give the
Mm-hmm.
money to the school. So why does these schools and administrators and coaches also feel like they need to interject themselves and have any say so over the NIL product? And as I
So,
said, I know this isn't a
yeah.
legal question as much,
Yeah.
but just kind of more of opinion. I'm interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So they are managing the athletic enterprise, right? Okay. And so if you think about it from an institutional perspective, they're managing budgets. So, and if you think of people think of NIL in one big bucket, when we now discuss there is this third party money and this the university money. Now, keep in mind, and make sure I answer your question, when the House settlement passed, several universities closed down their collectives and moved all that activity into the university's athletic department, rev
Interesting.
share money. So you had the institutional development officers now fundraising for that 20.5 million, thinking that that was all the money they would need. Okay. What has happened though, right? And now the 20.5, as we know, is supposed to cover every single athlete in every sport. It is the pot. What quickly happened was folks determined that that 20.5 million would not go far enough to fund all of the athletes that they were seeking to retain or to bring on board. And so the collectives got new life. Because for a lot of people, we thought collectives were going to be dead when the rev share came. And a lot of schools wound theirs up. Let me give you an example. When the University of Georgia and Damon Wilson are currently in a legal dispute around his NIL deal when he transferred from UGA to Mizzou. Okay. When that NIL deal was entered into, it was entered into with the collective.
Okay.
When the House settlement closed, the university shut down that collective and transferred all those agreements directly to the university because they thought they weren't going to need a collective anymore.
Understood.
Okay. Now, others have now stood them up with different names. So they aren't talked about as collectives anymore, but there are these third parties that are loosely affiliated with the school but have no legal connection to them. All right. So you've got to find benefactors essentially to fund these collectives to make these real large payments to these superstar athletes. And so when we talk about managing the collective or managing the entire pool of resources, it says this there is a cap to how much we can raise from these two sources, right? There's only so much money or so many sponsors or so many benefactors that are going to come in and contribute to this collective. So we've got to manage it because it can't be an unlimited pot of money. We can't raise unlimited dollars. So that's what I think the management is about is like it's got to stop someplace because the ability to generate money will will not grow as fast as the ability to spend the money. Right? So you got an
Right.
expense problem. You're spending
Right.
more money than you can raise through the various avenues available to you.
Right. So it's a little bit, I don't want to say confusing, but it does make me scratch my head because as a conference,
Yes.
you've got this deal with the networks,
Yep.
billions, hundreds of millions over X amount of years. That
Yep.
money comes into the conference office. They then distribute and send that money out to the respective schools. The
Mm-hmm.
respective schools, with respect to the rev share, now
Yep.
has a cap of up to this 22.5 million thereabouts. Up
Mm-hmm.
to, they can spend lower than that, they can
Yep.
spend up to that.
Yep.
I don't know why that's the number, but you can talk about that.
Yep.
So they have this money, and that's the part that gets shared. The allocation of that is totally up to the school.
That's right.
Whether it's now, ideally, if you're in an SEC school, they said, hey, 70 to 75% of that would go to football, another, 20%, 15 to 20% may go to basketball, and then there are other sports. Um, it sounds to me like that's always been the case, though, where
Okay.
this money comes in
Yep.
as an administrator, an AD, I have to budget this where this money's going anyway. The NIL wasn't a part of that. So now I'm folding this NIL, which is money from boosters and other entities. I'm bringing this money in. And now all of a sudden we're saying, well, we don't have enough money. That money was never there before. It was
Okay.
never
So
there.
the NIL money is different than the rev share money, though. So
I,
let
I agree. I agree,
right.
but that's my point. When you and if I'm following you correctly, when they're
Yeah.
talking about bringing that entity where it sat autonomous from the university and now bringing that internally into the schools, which is mind blowing to me. But to me, it's more of, in my opinion, schools and the NCAA just trying to control. In my opinion, there was no need for any control of it. It was there. It was outside of that. That could function parallel to the schools. Or am I just being
No.
totally naive?
You're right. So the collectives were functioning parallel to the school, and they had all sorts of issues because there was insufficient controls to begin with. So now, so you always need some controls, right? Because there's always a race to the bottom if there's no floor. So you do need some structure. And the collectives were poorly structured originally. So we did need to work on just structure and process. But if you set those aside for a minute, let's talk about the rev share. So you are correct. Universities are getting their payments allocated from the deals with the networks, et cetera. They were already getting that money, but there was no $20 million line item for payments to athletes under the rev share. So now the top line has not increased, but the expense has grown by $20 million, right? So revenue is roughly the same, expense has grown by 20 million. So the question becomes, how do I fill, where do I get the money for that 20 million? Because now it's an expense line item that I don't have a way to fund because those broadcasting dollars, those media rights were already spent on other things that are part of the athletic enterprise. Okay, so it's a gap in the budget. And so they handle gaps in the budgets in certain ways. Indiana, for example, late last year, no, it was definitely last year, Indiana, in anticipation of the rev share, trimmed the size of the athletic department, literally laid people off to make money, to have money to allocate towards the rev share. So now all these people's salaries have been freed up. So now we've got money to start putting in that expense bucket because you've got to find a way. The fact that there's a line item on the budget, you still got a way to fill it. And so when they talk about controlling it, they've got to figure out, where do I get the 20 and a half from? Just the fact that it's sitting on the budget sheet doesn't mean anything. So I got to fill it, but that's separate and apart from any money that the university or the collectives have raised to allocate to athletes. So it's two different pots that serve essentially a unified purpose, but you raise them two different ways. Does that make
Right.
sense to you?
No, it does. It does. I get the point of it being an expense that wasn't there prior. It should have been because it was exploitative and they were generating that money from the players, their popularity, and so on. The reason why many people are tuning in to watch that game is because of that halfback, right? That everyone wants to see run. So it should have always been there. But that's a different topic. What do you think the implications of what you were talking about
Yeah.
and this trimming and cutting, like you referred to with Indiana, impacts Title IX, which had a lot to do with the distribution of available scholarships for men and women, sports, and across the board. If you are trimming your athletic department and you've got a football team that has, that has a roster of 80 scholarship players,
Mhm.
how do you find your way out of that by still being able to put that team on the field without also compromising or being in violation of Title IX?
So Title IX requires you to look at the percentage of male and female students at your school, right? Okay. And have athletics programs that reflect that percentage of women's and men's sports, right? Okay. So Title IX sports, for the most part, of the women's sports, but I think you put all of the non-revenue sports in that bucket. I don't, Title IX creates issues because you have to add additional sports as your female student population increases or your male student population decreases, right? So you find yourself adding sports. But the problem is all of the sports that are non-revenue generating have to be funded, okay? And for sure, the revenue generating sports were supplementing and paying the way of the non-revenue generating sports. And so in this era, there is lots of pressure now, in part because you got that 20.5 million that was in part allocated to some of these non-revenue generating sports, right? Okay. To figure out what's the mix? How do I keep these non-revenue generating sports alive? Because they are important in an era when now so much of my budget has to go to pay athletes on the revenue generating side. And so it is a financial conundrum to figure out how to balance all of this. Okay. And that's why you see universities struggling and starting to run deficits in athletics because they've got all these additional line items from particularly that 20.5 is creating pressure. And that 20.5 is going to grow to 22 and 23 and 25 over time under the rules of the House settlement. So Title IX has always been an issue as the student population mix continues to change, as you get more women going to college than men. But the bigger bucket is non-revenue generating and how do you keep supporting all of those sports that we all think are important.
Got it. What drives, what drives or the end plan for the NCAA? And so history shows us that the biggest gains made, for lack of a better term, against the NCAA happened in the courts. We go back to, was it 88? The
Mhm.
schools had to sue to be able to have the rights to show more games on television. Uh, they had a restriction on coaches, which was settled out of court in 98, where they had a cap on coaches. And you lead into this current NIL era, these rulings of constantly having to go to the courts to get this
Yeah.
organization to kind of almost do what's fair. And I'm not trying to sound kind of,
Yeah.
hokey and say this needs to be
Yeah.
fair.
Yeah.
And I get fair is not the same thing as equal. But just from a standpoint of you being legal and a business person, what's the ideology behind that?
So keep in mind, what's strange to me is the NCAA is made up of member institutions. It does not stand apart from member institutions and say, I'm over here and I am managing you. All the member institutions are the NCAA. Okay. And the member institutions are determining whether they agree with the rules of the NCAA. But those are really the rules that are being asked for by the member institutions. Now, you have the way that the rules are codified, right? Which the umbrella organization may engage in the codification, but those are the rules the members have said that they want to have in place. And so I find it strange when we have the member institutions themselves suing the entity that they are a member of. Okay. And so that's where it gets strange to me, right? That somehow, in some cases, the member institutions are the NCAA, and in other cases, depending on how they feel, they are standing apart from and bringing suits against the NCAA. But certainly there is this feeling that the NCAA has lost control. Okay. But the member institutions have benefited from that control for a long time. You just raised the point yourself. They should have been paying these guys all along because they were collecting all this money. Well, the NCAA and the member institutions agreed to that approach, right? NCAA was simply enforcing the rule. But for certain, they have been neutered, and it is unclear how the NCAA reestablishes itself and regains some sense of control over the athletics enterprise. It's hard to see how they're going to do it, especially with respect to football and basketball. It's easier in the other sports, but it really has become a challenge because that's where you're seeing most of the legal action fighting the NCAA itself.
So
Yeah.
the comments you hear of this super conference or these Power Four schools breaking away and creating their own organization, even if it's just say for football and possibly basketball, you think there's legs to this, that this could actually take place and to where they essentially break away from the NCAA
Yeah.
and no longer utilize them in that capacity?
So I hope not, but
Hmm.
honestly, it's one of the options on the table. You got to figure something out, right? Okay. I hope that you don't get an entity that is operating outside of the NCAA because there should be a parent or an umbrella organization that is managing all of this. But it's starting to happen a little bit already because you understand, as part of the House settlement, the College Sports Commission stood up, right? Okay, that's supposed to be managing what's happening with all these NIL deals, right? That is operating outside of the NCAA, okay, by design. So you've got the first crack at that beginning to happen. And so we'll see if, I don't know if it's going to result in football and basketball breaking off, or Power Four breaking off from Group of Five and the rest of D1, D2, etc. I would like to see a unified whole, but I don't know.
Right. You know, what I guess running parallel to this, they sometimes intersect, is the transfer portal.
Yeah,
Now, I look at the transfer portal as, and this is very lay. I feel like I need to check my comments before I say them to a legal expert.
yeah,
So forgive me.
yeah.
But I always view the arguments that I hear against the transfer portal as something that flies in the face against what other students can do, right? Other students can go to a school and transfer year after year after year after year, 4 years if they so choose.
Mm-hmm.
In addition, there are coaches who break their contracts and without much fanfare, unless you're Lane Kiffin, go to another school in the middle of contract years, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
It,
Mm-hmm.
it really seems to be a thorn in the side of so many folks because student athletes, which I don't know why I hate the term, but student athletes
Mm-hmm.
can transfer, and folks are saying, no, there needs to be something else here. We need to put some sort of structure on this. And all of often what I hear are the solutions or the reason why it made it to the courts in the first place. What's
Yeah.
your take on that?
So students and student athletes fit in two different buckets.
Really?
Student
Okay.
ath what they do. So hear me out and let me know what you think about this. Okay, you are correct. If I'm a student, I am free to transfer as much as I want. Okay. If I have a scholarship at Clemson and I decide I want to go to University of Georgia, my scholarship does not go with me, and there's no guarantee that I'm going to get anything from University of Georgia. There is nothing stopping any student athlete from doing that right now.
Right.
Okay. You are free to move as much as you want. If you desire to graduate at some point, you realize that's unreasonable to do that without it. Okay. Because you lose credits every time you move. So students are positioned differently, can do that, but there are consequences from a scholarship perspective. The same thing is true with student athletes. If you have a scholarship to play a sport at school X and you decide you want to go to school Y, there is no guarantee that you're going to get a scholarship at school Y, but nothing prevents you from going. Okay. So I think we have to respect the fact that that freedom exists. But the problem is, and it really is an organizational problem. Me as a one-off student, it doesn't matter if I transfer. Okay. But if I'm part of a team, okay, my transfer does affect the collective team. So, from a coach's perspective, architecting and filling out a team and building cohesiveness around a group of people is difficult when that group of people is always in flux. So, not taking the student athlete perspective off the table for a second, just managing a continually moving group of people that are supposed to be a team is hard work. Okay. And so from some perspectives, like, how do you manage a team that can turn over 100% every year? Okay. Because the portal presents that possibility. And for sure, we've seen 40, 50% turnover, right? How do you manage that year after year? So I think that's a process issue and a team management and roster construction issue. So, and these athletes are under agreements for these scholarships. So contractually, it's like you can move, but you break the contract. And so you don't get any benefits of that going forward. But I think it's more when you hear the complaints from the organizational perspective, it's how do we keep a cohesive team? How do we do the things that we did around the team atmosphere when the culture around team has shifted?
I
That or not? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't disagree
Okay.
as a team sport person. I understand the continuity and having the consistency,
Yeah.
but I think the majority of me leans back towards the player, and I see players and how well they've done. Be it Mendoza, who just finished a season at
Yeah.
Indiana for the ages. Go back to Joe Burrow and on and on. The list goes on and on and on of
Mhm.
players who were able to transfer, play
Yes.
immediately, because
Yes.
remember, the NCAA had this sit out rule,
That's
which
right.
is absolutely ridiculous.
That's right.
And so I tend to look at it from that standpoint. We have
Mhm.
a system where a young man at 17, 18 years old sits down and signs a letter of intent to go to a school. And when he's at his youngest, he's making a decision on where he's going to go to school. And then somewhere along the way, we're saying now that you've completed your sophomore year and you're 20 years old, you're older, wiser, and you've experienced the college experience and the college life. Now I'm going to put restrictions on you to determine when you can leave or if you can't leave and so on.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right? It seems upside down to me. Wait a minute. When I was younger,
Yep.
we didn't hear this. When I was more naive and didn't understand the process, you didn't hear this outcry. Now that I'm older and I understand, right? Now I can't. So I do hear what you're saying, and I've heard a lot of
Yeah.
coaches say that. But to me, coaches are going have to come up with something more than it's difficult. It's hard for us,
I hear
right,
that.
to
I hear
really
that.
make an argument
Yeah. Yeah.
to take for me to side with them over what's best for that young man.
So it depends on whose lens you're looking through, right? If you're looking from the student athlete lens, there's clearly a perspective, and there is not good overlap in the Venn diagram between the student athlete perspective, which you just articulated, and the coaching or the enterprise perspective, which I just suggested was at least a rationale for part of
Mhm.
their, part of
Yep.
their approach. So I appreciate that. Um, but it is difficult to understand where the middle is between those things and whether there is a middle where everyone can be happy. You also mentioned coaching moves. Okay. And coaching moves have become problematic because, to your point, they can happen at any time. They provide no continuity whatsoever. A student athlete decides they want to come to a school because they want to be enhanced and coached by this coach and regroomed by this coach, and coach decides he's going to school X, or she decides that she's going to school X. So part of the framework that we have to consider is, are we going to constrain everybody in the ecosystem in some way? Or are we going to constrain nobody in the ecosystem some way? And so it is unreasonable from my perspective to not constrain the coaches at all, but try to constrain the athletes. Okay, that seems unfair. Okay. So we haven't talked about constraints on coaches because, coaches with their packages now, they are paid if they are released for no good reason because it's a Tuesday and they lost 6 games. They can go sit on the couch and earn $20 million over the next 2 or 3 years for doing nothing. Okay.
Right.
And so the behavior is incented to some degree by the agreements that are on the table. But we need to think better about how do you create alignment between the behavior we want the athletes to show and the behavior we want the coaches to show. And right now, there's no alignment between the expectations.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm not sure if that bell can be unrung. I mean, I don't know what, certainly from a transfer standpoint anyway. It's been ruled on, and it's not that it can't be overturned, but something needs to change. And listen, as a sports fan, of course, there were players that transferred out from my favorite team or my school that I wish hadn't left. But you know what? When I was, if this was a 5-star,
Mm-hmm.
and he was a one and done,
Yeah.
we weren't attached. We couldn't get attached to him anyway, right? So
Yeah.
it's not so different. And I get it what you're saying. It's mass now, right? You
Yeah.
could turn over 50% of your roster. So I get it. I'm not suggesting that nothing's wrong with it. But I'm just pointing out, which is probably not a good argument, the hypocrisy of it, if you will.
I
There are,
appreciate that, and I think that you are right. If the two camps are the athletes and the coaches, and you allow and are okay with different sets of behavior, right, between the two groups, and we should think differently about that because what we see now is my perspective is the coaches are demonstrating a lack of loyalty, and the athletes are demonstrating a lack of loyalty to the institution. Let me be clear, and the athletes are now demonstrating a lack of loyalty to the institution. We feel irritated when the coaches do it. We get mad when the athletes do it. Really?
right.
Right?
Yeah.
So if we're going to say that a lack of loyalty to the institution is okay, it should be okay for everybody. And if we think it's not okay, it should be not okay for everybody.
Yeah. Do you see these changes, or if changes happen at the federal level versus the state level, and how that impacts? And I'm going back to this
Yeah,
NIL
yeah,
structure and how these things
yeah,
happen. Do you see state law kind of affecting this? And I don't know of any pending case or anything, but just in general, um, as a way for uh, schools, if they kind of lobby their local or
yeah,
state level governments
yeah,
to enact some sort of laws and things better
yeah.
to manage that. And if so, what are the possible ramifications of that?
So I think what we see happening is states are not enacting laws to manage it. They're enacting laws to create better opportunity for their schools. So suddenly winning has become the most important thing ever, right? Okay. And we know that it's just like Highlander. There can only be one national champion. So you got all these schools chasing national championships, but there can only be one, right? So here's what's happened most recently. Most recently, I don't know if it's passed or if it has been proposed in Mississippi. Mississippi is now going to agree that NIL, that payments to athletes will not be taxed at the state level. But every other resident in Mississippi is paying income tax. But they're saying these payments to athletes will not be subject to income tax in Mississippi.
Now, is this the NIL portion of the rev share, or all of it?
All of it, as far as I understand. All
Wow.
right. Any revenue generated by the athlete will not be subject to Mississippi income tax. Okay. They have a longer plan to phase out income tax for the rest of the citizens of Mississippi. Right. So you have now written a law solely for the purpose of trying to increase your potential of getting the right players to win a game.
I'm sorry, is there anything wrong with that, Janine? I'm joking, obviously.
But really, it's like, and so you see, there's just a number of things like that where
Right.
the laws are being written to improve the potential of a game to be played and won, right? So you don't see the legislatures introducing laws to curtail behavior. You see them enacting laws to increase the possibility that their state can win. Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. But if I lived in Mississippi, I'd feel some kind of way if the kid that's playing football doesn't have to pay income tax, but I do.
Right. Unless you're an Ole Miss graduate and that quarterback's going to Ole Miss.
Me.
Listen, I'm gonna last question for me, and it really is just a very broad question with respect to your feeling about the future. What does the future hold? A number of cases may happen, may be there. I think right now the system is held together with thread. It's very loose and it can certainly change and buckle at any moment. But where do you see this in the short term, 2 years out, 5 years out, and so on?
So I believe at some point the system will break. I believe that you cannot have this unlimited arms race on payments to athletes, because at some point you run out of people who are willing to sustain that. So at some point, okay, because you need a benefactor. You need a Cody Campbell at Texas Tech and those 4 or 5 families that are undergirding all of their activity. You need a Phil Knight in Oregon, and he's saying, hey, spend all you want, right? Okay. You need a benefactor to keep that going, right? Okay. You need a Larry Ellison for the University of Michigan because his wife is an alum, right? And so as long as you got a billionaire benefactor, okay, let's keep the good times going. But everyone doesn't have a billionaire benefactor. So I am concerned that the system will run out of steam because there's inflation on the side of how quickly we're beginning to pay athletes and the revenue that the universities have to raise to support that is not growing nearly as fast.
But can I just interject for a moment?
Sure.
And so I get it. You bring up Ellison and Knight with their respective schools, with their alums.
Yep.
But there's always been a system of have and have-nots,
You are
right?
right.
And so I don't see how that's so dramatically different. Two, I also want to say that the money being spent for having 5 stars at every position, you just can't. It's not, you know what I mean? There's life after that, right? Coach up a player.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if there's a support group where we sit around and we cry because we don't have enough money to pay millions of dollars to 5 star athletes. We can instead of having the requisite 30 on our team, we're only going to have 15 of them on our team. The other players, we're going to have to get some 3 stars and get some good coaching in there.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the part where I find it difficult. The woe is me. We got to raise more money. It's an arms race. We've got to get better facilities. Well, the facilities are fine as they are. You are making that decision to get more because, as you said, it is an arms race. Well, you can't have every player. You can cap your spending when it comes to the money that you're making available for players. You can cap your spending on the money you make available to build a fitness, another gym,
Yeah.
another
Yeah.
sauna room, another media room. Like that's the part and so when we start to hear, well, these schools are losing money, they're X amount in debt. Why? Why? I mean, I know why. I mean, I
Yeah.
say
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
tongue in cheek, but manage your spending like the rest of us. If you can't afford to purchase and build that new wing on the athletic department, then you can't do it, dog. Like that's just what it is. So
I hear that. I hear that. And we haven't gotten to the point yet where people are prepared to do that. You are absolutely right. Okay, now I'm overstating. Top half of Power Four is not engaging in the requisite thoughtfulness about spending. They're just spending money. Okay. Bottom half of Power Four, the rest of Group of Five, the rest of D1, those folks are not even remotely filling the $20 million bucket.
right.
Okay. Because they cannot. So you are correct. But what has happened now, it used to be that players were attracted to programs because they offered better opportunities to end up making it to the league or better opportunities for championships. The dynamic has now changed around the motivation for choosing a school because there's now so much potential dollars at play. So it's changed the dynamic of who wins. For sure, transfer portal and NIL has democratized the spreading of talent. Right? Okay, I got Clemson footballs. We went through an era where we were winning all the games. Right? It was Clemson and Alabama, back and forth, back and forth. Because
Right.
we had created systems that every athlete wanted to participate in, and there was no democratization of the process. You introduce dollars, and suddenly schools that had no opportunity, Indiana, suddenly is like, we're showing up now because I'm going to take some of your players that you would get before because now I can incent them in ways that I could not incent them before. So for sure, there's a spreading of talent that has created much more interesting games. There's much more variability in who can win and who can lose, but that's just temporary because you're going to settle out to now a top group of folks that are always going to have the dollars. And so just the dynamic around the decision making about who's top tier will change. It's going to be driven more by dollars than by culture, I think.
Yeah. Awesome. Janine, I listen, I can't thank you enough for stopping in on the show and talking about this, certainly this topic. Very passionate. You can see I am. It's just like all of our
Yeah.
listeners and people kind of leaning into this. But what I really do appreciate is you bringing your expertise on this program and kind of unpacking this and explaining this in small bites in ways that we can all understand and ingest this. Thank you. We're forever thankful for you for doing that. You're always welcome here, so please.
Thank you. I'm
Yeah,
looking forward to coming back.
good deal. Appreciate that. Thanks, folks. Thanks for tuning in to the J&K Show. We'll be back real soon.
Thanks for watching the J&K Show.